This is Duke University.
I'm going to introduce Bobby Baram now. He is currently the CFO and COO of Translope Incorporated, which is a next-generation passenger information system that offers riders a safe, comfortable, and convenient way for the bus, while also giving transit operators a more efficient and more appreciated transit system. He's been involved in quite a number of other things. I'll just mention a few here. Before that, he was the founder of Radar Funds and also the CFO and COO, and led to the creation and growth of a venture-backed healthcare IT company offering hardware, software, and services solution to track medical equipment and patients in hospitals. He was also the director of the business development at MCNS Research and Development Institute, the CFO of Paracom Networks, and helped start and grow the IBM spinoff Home Director. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Bobby up, and we'll go into the conversation, and we're very much looking forward to your presentation.
Can you guys hear me?
That's a good
Yes.
yes.
No?
Yes.
That's a no.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now you can? Okay, now we can. Okay, good evening. Tell you what, I think I'm gonna walk down here so you can actually see me, if I can see you. So,
Slide you over,
so I have about kind of 10 or so slides in here, kind of, sharing some of my thoughts on financials. So as you have questions, feel free to raise your hands. We'll make this interactive. So I've been involved with a handful of startups from both starting them and also from the funding side. So I can kind of give you perspective from both aspects. Before we kind of jump into the financials, I kind of want to go over, a little bit, if I were the kind of investors, if I'm looking at a business, especially a lot of what I've heard you guys are working on, pre-revenue, high technology growth companies, what are the things that investors look for? So I'm going to kind of jump in here. First one, you need to start with a need. There's a handful of businesses you can do if you have a want, entertainment businesses, gaming businesses, some consumer-oriented businesses. But if you're really looking at high growth technology, you need to start with what I call a deep unresolved need. It's one of the most fundamental things you need to have in your business. With that, some type of an IP. It could be a trade secret, it could be patents, but ideally something that's defensible in here. And if you want to go after venture money, they're really big into that, because if the startup doesn't work, 9 out of 10 times it doesn't, they want to make sure at least there is something there that they could potentially sell off and get some of their money back. Competitive advantage. You're never going to have competitive advantage for a long period of time. No company does. But ideally, you really want to figure out what are the feature sets that give you sustainable advantage for a period of time and be able to articulate those. I'm a big fan of a ROI model. The quicker you can figure out what's the return on investment and quantify that, the easier it's going to make not only selling your product, but also raising money. Not that you can't build a company if you have soft ROI. You can. It's just going to make it more and more difficult, both raising money and selling. So growing market. This is the one, at the end of the day when you want to raise money, most investors kind of look at 3 risks. You have management risk, technology risk, and market risk. Eventually people get comfortable on the technology side. The management team, a lot of investors believe, if it's not there, they can fix it. It's the market risk that you spend a lot of your time and they spend their time on. If you build this widget, will people actually buy it? This is where sometimes you just have to get lucky, but this is where you want to do a lot of homework on your market. And I can give you some examples when I did some startups, how I did the research there. Ideally, you want to have an existing distribution channel to take your product to market. The first dozen or two sales, I'm a big fan of, you do it directly. You have to do it, get close to the customer, but eventually there's only so many of you, so many salespeople you can hire. You got to be able to go through a channel. If you don't have a channel, it's very expensive to build one. One of the startups I was involved with was called Home Director. We spun it out of IBM here. And we would go to developers, new homes, and we would put infrastructure in for wiring. Right now, if you buy a home, pretty much comes with it. Back then, more than 10 years ago, the channel wasn't there. So we had spent about $20 million building this channel. We would go to security people, electricians, flying them down, train them how to pull the wires. They would get certified. So if the channel is not there for your product, sometimes it becomes very expensive to distribute your product or services. The most important one, outstanding team of the management, advisors, and the board. What I call liquid customers. You could have a great product, the customers want it, but if they don't have the money to pay for it, it's not going to get you very far. Especially these days where the budgets are really hard, you got to come up with a business model here that your customers can actually afford it. Stay focused. A lot of businesses try to go after multiple different markets all at the same time. You have to stay focused. And finally, is what I call a reasonable amount of financing. Now, what's reasonable really depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a software company, a reasonable amount of financing, maybe a few $1 million. You're doing pharmaceutical and biotech, you're talking 10 times that amount. So really depends on your market. Reasonable amount of financing to get to a profitable model in an acceptable time frame. Again, acceptable time frame also depends on the technology and industry you're going after. These days, it's taking longer and longer to exit the startups, and investors know that. So in order to do that, we'll get into the financials and how you start building them up. But before we do that, kind of questions at a little high level in here. At the end of the day, when you want to go raise money, this is substantially the list that you're going to get in front of you. You've got to be able to prove to investors, what, I've done my homework in these kind of 9, 10 areas. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
For the number 4, the quantifiable, a lot of times it seems that the return that someone might get, your customer, is not necessarily a tangible dollar that you can put into it. Is there any thoughts that you have on, so for example, with medical devices, we're treating a patient and making them better. What might those metrics be to quantify?
So,
Bobby, could you repeat the question for the people?
Sure. So the question had to do with number 4 up there with the ROI model and how you kind of go by doing some of that, especially in cases where you have kind of what I call soft ROI model. So when I look at ROI models, really kind of falls into 3 categories. You are either increasing the sale for the customer, you're either decreasing their expenses, or you're improving productivity, workflow, all the other type of things. If you can prove you can increase their revenue, it is ideally that's the best case. It is the easiest to sell, it is the hardest to prove. If you can kind of decrease their expenses, it's a little bit harder to sell, but people, if it's really real, they'll believe in it. When I did the startup with Radar Fund, we would track equipment and patients in hospital. We had quantifiable data that, your rental would go down, your capital expenditures would go down. We had done a few hospitals, I could tell them how. We had all the other stuff. Okay, nurses spend less time doing this. So those add value, but it really goes back to who's going to write the check. At the end of the day, we had to go to a CFO and a CEO. They said, yeah, I know the nurse really likes it, but they're the ones who are writing the check. So you can do it. I mean, if you don't have it, I'm just telling you, it is one of those where not that you can build. There are a lot of companies that right now you can build up without having real quantifiable one. But the way I've always done it is talk to as many people as you can. The most difficult time to do that is in the beginning, which is why you want to get as quickly as possible 1 or 2 referenceable clients and then see what the use case is. When we did Radar Find, we raised money. The requirement was we had to go install the product in a hospital and we would pay for it because the VCs wanted to see, you know what is the return on this thing? They didn't care about the rest of the stuff at that point. They wanted to know what it was. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it really comes down to you got to talk to the customers and help them quantify this thing for you. So
I had a question on the growing market.
yes.
Say for a medical device company, you can say, okay, you're trying to eliminate a problem or treating a disease or something, maybe new equipment. But say for a product like I think you worked on something like a travel coordination, something similar.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you quantify a market for that? Because you never know that people are going to accept that or not accept that. So how do you say, okay, these are like these many people in the market, they're going to use it once they want to like it, but so they might not like it. So how do you say that's a market or that's not a market?
So
Could you repeat it again for people in the back?
sure. So the question had to do with number 5 in here about more from the definition of the large growing market. It is, so you could go after a market that's already large and you have a disruptive technology and you get into it. My point in this one is more from, the growth path. At what point can I sell 1 unit and 1,000 units and 10,000 units? And nobody really knows the answer to that. I mean, this is why you see research reports with Frost, Sullivan, all these people, make up these numbers. Nobody really knows, which is why, VCs at the end of the day, they're taking a lot of risks. Is this really the right time? Which is why I go back to, if you can actually prove, there is a ROI for your customer. It really does something fundamental. Then all you really need is a handful of customers, then those become referenceable, and those markets start picking up. So that's kind of where I was going mostly with number 4. There is really, in the earliest stage where, there is no market for that, you're trying to create one, there is no good way. And investors know that, which is why, like when we did Radar Find, there was no market for tracking patients or tracking assets. So we spent about a year. We interviewed 60 hospitals. Eventually, we got down to 12 hospitals and decision makers that said, you know what, if these guys build this thing, we're going to buy it, and here are the reasons why. That satisfied investors to say, you know what, I think there is something in here, and they took the risk.
So you need to have a feedback for that.
You need to have a feedback. The most important thing you can do as you're building, whether it's your financials or everything else, go talk to potential customers in here. At the end of the day, all these things are driven from customer feedback. So I'm going to kind of jump into the financials in here. So there are 2 ways you can kind of do financials. What I call a cash budget and kind of a complex gap, your typical financial statements you may have seen in your finance or accounting course. I am a big fan of, for earliest stage, to start with a cash budget, okay? And what is it good for? If you want to do earliest stage fundraising, if you're looking for short-term financing, short-term forecasting, day-to-day cash management. When I manage companies, I use a cash budget to manage it, okay? Eventually, you get to a point where you need to develop more accrual basis, full-blown financials. But my recommendation to you is don't do it in the beginning. I've rarely seen people do it right. There are a handful of models around the park that's going on, and not all of them fits all businesses. So unless you really know what you're doing, my recommendation is to stay away from developing balance sheets and cash flow statements and tie them together and try to explain your business that way. Go the cash basis. So how do you do it? It's a very simple way. I start with Excel, and I keep track of 2 main things: money coming in, money going out. Okay, so and I keep track of what I call milestones. I always want to know what are the key milestones in a business, especially if you're doing pre-revenue. If you're doing pre-revenue, you're going for fundraising. People want to know if they give you money, what is it for? You're trying to get something out of the lab. You're trying to do your first pilot. What are those value-changing milestones? So simple Excel, I do it by month. Cash coming in, cash going out, and then you kind of just do a simple math to figure out the balance. So what's cash coming in? You have sales, you raise money, grants, loans, and everything else that could be cash, interest income, those types of things. But anything you could think of that's, somebody is writing you a check, put it in cash in. It doesn't so much matter which category as long as you can kind of keep track of it. I do the same thing for cash out. What are the main things? Well, cost of sales, inventory, support purposes, engineering, sales and marketing, G&A, capital purchases, loan payments, anything you could think of that you're literally writing a check for. Okay? Simple beginning cash, ending cash. Okay? So do an example. First month, let's say I got $30,000 from a grant. Okay, my ending cash is $30,000. Next month, I start with $30,000, and let's say I spent $20,000 on something. I end up with $10,000. Simple cash budget, do it on a cash basis. Just think of when is it I'm actually going to end up writing a check for some vendor. So you guys kind of get this at a high level. Can you actually go develop this thing? Simple, kind of Excel, cash in, cash out. You got questions? Ask. Yes, sir.
For the purposes of this competition, do we need all like GAAP financial projections?
I have no idea what competition or so.
So yeah, this we don't stipulate, we don't mandate that you give all financial projections. This model, for instance, works beautifully. I used this model last year. I was one of the finalists myself, so I agree. Especially for pre-revenue businesses,
Yes.
this is what explains what you do with the proceeds the best, I feel. However, having said that, if you do have detailed financial projections, you know exactly how they're going to look, you have a better understanding of how your business is going to pan out, then so be it.
Yes.
So that's our opinion. So we don't really mandate, there's no guideline that says do one or the other, it's your decision. So.
Yes, sir.
Will post-revenue projections similar kind of chart, or do you
I've done post-revenue up to $10 million per year annually, and I still use this. I mean, when it comes to day-to-day, month-to-month, I want to manage my cash, that's what I do. Now, where you get into eventually do the gap stuff is, at that point, you have bankers, you have VCs, you have a board, they may want to see it, you got to worry about the audit. So you do both. But no matter really how much money from a cash-to-cash basis. I mean, I have a friend, high level at IBM, he jokes with me, they run IBM on an Excel file using something like this. But this makes it easy. I'm not keeping track of depreciation or those things because at the end of the day, a lot of these businesses, you want to know your cash. So I'll talk about, that's a good entry to the next slide, which is, pre-revenue, substantially there are about 4 metrics, whether you're at a VC meeting or a board meeting, you're gonna get asked. Okay, you're gonna get asked about your burn rate, how much money are you spending every month, okay? You're gonna get asked about the runway, how long is that gonna last you, okay? Then you're gonna get asked about sales-related metrics, okay? Anything to do with sales, whether it's the first customer or the 10th customer. And then anything else that could be value changing, whether it's the FDA or a license or a development mark. But of all the board meetings I've gone to for so many companies, substantially I would say 99% of the discussion is around these topics in here. So whenever I want to answer these questions with a simple cash budget, I can do that. I can tell them how much I'm burning, what I'm using the money for, how long it's going to last. So once you get post-revenue, yes, you got to worry about all of these, and then you get into all the other traditional metric. Okay, here's the sales growth, now I got to worry about my margin, and at that point, yes, the cash model becomes harder and harder to be able to answer some of those questions. So sales. Sales really, this is the most important one, and it's also the most difficult one to do, and there is really, I'll tell you some ways how not to do it, and how to do it. So there's a lot of words up there, but what it basically says is, go talk to as many customers as you can and get the information from them. And this goes back to what I was telling you, the more customers you talk to, you'll be surprised in pre-revenue, you think you know what the feature set is and what the product is until you go talk to a handful of these customers and they tell you, what, this is really what I want that I'll pay for. Who the actual customer is will take you a while to figure out. Who's the one that's actually going to end up writing the check. But if you can figure out this sentence, which sometimes it takes months and months. For Radar Fund, it took us about a year. By the time we went through this whole 60 hospitals, figuring out, okay, of all these hospitals, how much would they pay, when they would pay it, how long the sales cycle would be, who would write the check. So my suggestion to you is do this from bottoms up. Okay? And by bottoms up, I mean, don't do top down. Don't say, if I only have whatever percentage of the market, this is what my revenue is. Whatever that number is you want to make up. I see a lot of business plans based on this, saying, if I only get 1% or 5% or whatever your number is. That shows almost no credibility. It's good for back of the envelope analysis. If I look at some business plan, I want to say, well, okay, if I believe those numbers, is that 1% of the market, 10% of the market, but don't start with these and build your financials, okay? And be realistic, understand your sales cycle. A lot of businesses, it takes a while. Certain industries, easily takes a year, year and a half, 2 years to sell into. So when you talk to your customers, this is where you start realizing how long does it actually take by the time they end up writing you a check in here. So I did a little bit of a research. This is years ago. I haven't updated it, but I looked up how many companies in North Carolina went from 0 to 50 million. From the day they started to 50 million in 5 years. So how many I found? Take a guess.
0.
I found none. So I actually looked up Google. And if you read their original S1 filing, they barely made it, but not there. I calculated 47, 45 million, somewhere around there. So 50 million is a lot of money. But you'll be surprised how many business plans are circulating around the park that have 50 million in year 3, much less year 5. So, you do want to show the growth of your business, but be realistic. Be realistic with how long it takes to sell something in here. So, and this is where you have to show your business plan to people who know. You're doing medical device, there's a handful of medical device experts around. Tell them, hey, look, yes, it is a different medical device, but do these numbers, at least at a high level, kind of make sense in here from a revenue growth? So sales is the most important one. Substantially, a lot of everything else kind of is driven from the sales side. So kind of questions on sales in here. Yes, sir.
So even if you do go bottoms up, I guess you would go to one customer and you'd find out how much he would pay for a service or a product that you're planning to offer. But then when you use that information to present a yearly revenue or things like that, then you would have to get a sense of X percentage by market, right?
Well, yes and no. You asked really two questions. So one is more what I call on the pricing side, and one is, how many customer. On the pricing side, yeah, I do ask a lot of customers in pre-revenue how much they pay, but more importantly, I'm interested in what's the pain I'm solving. If they tell me if they install this product and their rental goes down by $100,000, and then they turn around and say, I'm only going to pay you $20,000. Well, I know I have some negotiating room when I price this thing. So I'm more interested on the pricing side. It's a whole separate discussion, but I'm mostly, yes, I like to hear them what they would pay for it, but more importantly, I like to see the ROI model, what's the pain point I solve. As for your question kind of on the number of the growth, I still won't do it based on this. I would still say, realistically, like I was in the hospital. In the hospital market, if you want to pretty much sell something, you gotta already have had the discussions. You're talking 12, 18-month sales cycle. So the original list is really that list. We had 60, we said, okay, of these 60, 12 is already seem to be somewhat referenceable. Those are the ones I kind of project over a period of time. Eventually, when you get to year 3, 4, after that, yeah, you gotta make up numbers. But this is where I've always had the debate with investors where, they may as well make up the numbers. Anything after 18 months, 2 years for earlier stage of startup is anybody's guess. So Was a question?
I have the same question.
Same question there. Okay.
On that, what if you're selling like a consumer, like a website or something like that, and you obviously you can't go out to every one of your customers and talk with them. Do you do like projections of, try to forecast how many customers there are based on who you talk to and, project that out to the market?
So consumer is a whole different one. I've done only one consumer play, and I probably won't do another one, especially in RTP for different reasons. But it's my view on consumer is if I were to do projections for consumer stuff, especially web-based, I actually go launch the business. I believe if you want to do consumer and software with 50K, you should be able to launch it, prove the model, get a good sense of the numbers. If you can't do it with 50K and you can get that with the grant money, friends and family, there's probably not a business there. So based on that, then you can kind of look at it. But if you're into some of this new stuff with the social marketing stuff, I don't know, I guess you can kind of look at comparable type of models, but I'm a big fan of just do it. And if you're doing consumer stuff, it shouldn't take that long to get the customers. Based on that, maybe you can start forecasting some trend stuff. But yeah, you're right. There's only so many consumers you can kind of talk to. So, was that a question? No. Okay. So cost of sales, and I won't really drill into this much, other than saying you want to kind of think through everything you sell has a cost, whether it's hardware, software, or services. So I see a lot of software businesses with zero cost of sales. You have cost even for a pure software play, whether it's packaging, delivering your media, it's your hosting, it's the support, you have cost. So if you have hardware, I always look at the cost of material is substantially the most of it, packaging, shipping, but almost always the cost of material, if you're doing a hardware play, is the most dollar-wise. Any third-party licensing fees you have to pay, delivery fees, packaging fees. If you're using any open source, you may have to license. And then think about the services. So really think through, if I were to develop whatever the gadget is, what is every cost that goes into it? This becomes more and more important as you get to the revenue side, because a lot of businesses, we can sell something, but then you just can't make money at it. And yes, sir.
Well, you can finish your sentence.
No, that's the thing. So you really want to know. When I do like the presentation for VCs, I always have a business case. If I were to sell one of this is what the revenue looks like. This is what the cost looks like. And hopefully, if I sell 1,000 of them, some of the cost metrics go down. So eventually, you want to start thinking about that model. What is the economic business case? And so not only have the revenue, you want to capture as much of the direct cost as possible.
How would you begin to quantify and break down the cost of selling for a software as a service business, where people are accessing a website, so to speak, so there is no delivery, there's no packaging, there's no CD you mail,
right?
But there certainly is a product delivered just via the web.
Yeah, well, look at the software as a service. It is your costs are if you have no hardware, substantially you have hosting type of related fees, right? You may have licensing fees, you may not have. You may have written the whole thing up yourself, but most likely you're using MySQL database and you're using Apache. You gotta pay, whether or not you're paying. Eventually you have some cost at some point. You're gonna write those checks. So, but that's the beauty of the software. Software, if I look at a software business, I'm looking at an 80% or so margin business. So, but yeah, which is one reason, when you look at, software plays, investors love it because if it picks up, there's not that much there. But go look up even mature companies, your Microsoft, your Oracle, go look up tonight in Yahoo. You'll see it's about an 80% margin. And substantially what it is, if you're not doing delivery and packaging fee, they're paying some type of a third-party licensing fee to somebody. So, but no, you don't have a lot of cost for a pure SaaS play. But a lot of SaaS plays are really, people call it SaaS play, but what they have on the side that they're not telling you is they have a lot of support costs. So, and those, however you capture it, to me, every time you add a handful of customers, your support costs go up. So there is cost associated with that.
Do you factor the time in the cost? Like some of the people I've known, they do it. If I've been writing software for some other company, I get paid, say, $50 an hour or something like that. So when they write their own software and the time they've utilized to write that software, they calculate it by the amount somebody else would have paid for it and put it there in the cost. Is that a
Okay, so the question is on do you put the cost of development for software and cost of sales? So this is where you could get into cash basis versus accrual. I'm a big fan of, I'll tell you the answer is no. Okay, now you can argue on the accounting proper audit whether you should do it, and there are specific accounting rules that some of it you do before its application, on and on. But I don't. I mean, to me, those are one-time costs that I capture in engineering R&D.
Okay,
So
that's right.
there are some businesses you want to do that. I mean, if you want to do semiconductor, it's one of those things investors expect that amount of, they want to see that cost amortized over how many chips you're going to do. But no, I capture that in R&D. So the way I always do R&D, again, I'm a big fan of do it bottoms up. I start with milestones. You want to know what those milestones are before you write your plan, before you go raise money. Whatever it may be. It could be go from PowerPoint, the slide set, to the first electronics board, or from the electronics to actually get this thing in the field, or some big thing in the lab to something miniaturized. Whatever those value-changing milestones are, you want to know what they are. Okay, so figure those things out. Then figure out for that milestone, what does it take to do it? Certain number of engineers, certain amount of dollars. Figure out whatever you're doing, what are those associated costs with it. Little note about understanding lead times. This goes substantially if you're doing a hardware, electronics, medical device. I see a lot of plans that people quickly assume that you can get things certified. If you're going for UL certification, FDA, FCC, these things take a lot of time. If you're doing electronics, you want to do manufacturing these days, the lead times have substantially gone up, especially because of China. They've shut down a lot of factories. Whereas it used to be a few weeks you could get electronic parts, now they're averaging about 18 to 20 weeks. So as you start developing kind of your financials, think about how long does it actually take to get certain number of items in here. Even hiring. I see a lot of plans suddenly after funding in day 2, they have 10 people. It takes time to hire. So start thinking about those metrics. If something is not core to you, I'm a big fan of, especially in engineering, outsource it. It may cost a little more, but in most cases it gets done on time and on budget versus you try to do it in-house. So if it's not core to you, I'm a big fan of outsourcing. A note on time and buffer. So engineering, things go wrong when you're doing R&D. That's just the nature of it. Investors know this thing. So I would put in significant amount of time and expense. You hear investors talk about a factor of 2. Just assume it's going to take twice as long and twice as much. And in most cases, that's the case. I can tell you for radar fine. I went to my CTO, I said, give me your most conservative case. And I took his numbers and I doubled it. And we still didn't make those specific things. It's just the nature of it. Things go wrong when you're doing engineering, and investors know it. So you want to put a buffer for that. Yes, sir.
My question with the buffer is, okay, so if we make the assumption that it's always twice as long, but I'm showing people my milestones, they're assuming it's twice as long. I already made it twice as long as I thought. Suddenly we have 4x in there instead of 2x.
Yeah, so this is where, which most likely you're going to end up using it. But so this really goes back to when you're presenting the financials, what kind of a position are you very conservative, very aggressive? I'm a big fan of documenting the assumptions. So you'll see, I'll talk about it in a second. As long as you're documenting things, people know, what? This is the buffer line. I actually call it. Here is my buffer line, both time and dollars on my financials. I don't just try to say, I just put a buffer line. It's going to take another $500,000 of things coming up. So as long as you're disclosing it properly, then you'll get on the same page with investors. So, but if you don't do it, they'll do it, which is why a lot of times you hear investors saying for every dollar they put in, they're saving another $1, another $2 as dry powder on the side because they know you're going to come back and needing it. So, anybody know who that guy is? That's Murphy. I finally found his picture. That's Edward A. Murphy Jr. So you've heard of Murphy's Law, things will go wrong. If it has to go wrong, it usually will. You know, it's the only picture I could find on Google, so that's it. You can look him up on Wikipedia if you're interested in his story. Fascinating story. Sales and marketing. So eventually, as you get going, you know, at some point you need to project some sales and marketing expenses. This is where even more you want to find somebody who knows your technology and your market and can give you some guidance, because you could end up spending a lot of money in sales and marketing and not necessarily in the right area or right time. So find people who've done whatever you're doing before, whether it's medical device or something else, that can give you guidance. The big item there is usually, you know, your sales expense, your direct sales people, you know, compensation related matters. Then you get into all these marketing stuff, whether it's the website or collateral or marketing matters, and you know, that could be a whole, you know, talk of when you do which one, but I'll just, you know, tell you at a high level, you want to think about those and then go talk to people who've done it before, and they can kind of give you some guidance of what makes sense. If you are going to go to the channel at some point, or you're not, you're going to do this thing whole direct, there is quite a bit of cost associated. You know, just because you found somebody to resell your product, that doesn't mean suddenly you don't have any more cost. You have cost to potentially train those things, do joint marketing development. So start thinking about what are the costs associated with, you know, taking your product to the channel. If you've never done it before, this is where, again, talk to people, you know, who've done it. A lot of things in marketing can be outsourced, especially in earlier stage, even further on. So I'm a big fan of, if you're going to bring a marketing person in, bring a generalist. You want people that have done a lot of things, not only PR, but collaterals. They are general marketing type of people. So sales and marketing, I capture them by item in here. I always have about 10 items I put in G&A and administrative costs, and there they are. You know, compensation, rent, insurance. If you don't know what any of these are, ask me, I'll tell you. Travel, you know, legal costs, accounting costs, IT-related costs, taxes, benefits, you know, and all the miscellaneous stuff. So, yes, sir.
How do you account for equity compensation for, say, a pre-revenue company?
So accounting for equity compensation. So equity usually is not cash, right? I mean, I'm giving people share. So I'm not putting it, this is only things that I'm writing a check for, I'm receiving a check for. So if I'm paying somebody, you know, in stock options to do some work, well, you know, I keep track of that, you know, on my capitalization table. I don't put it really here. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, okay, but then in terms of, say, an investment pitch,
Yes.
is it better to demonstrate your compensation as a general case where you're paying your employees the full amount, or would it be better to look at it specific to your circumstances where you have certain people maybe already on your team that are willing to take a significant pay cut?
I would do the latter.
Hey, Bobby, do you mind repeating that for people in the back?
Yeah, so the question was with the compensation, especially in earlier stage where you pay people, you know, in equity, they take a lower salary, you know, is that what you portray, or do you portray, you know, what they would have earned, you know, in as a market salary? And my answer is no. Show people what you're actually gonna do, which is you put people that, if you suddenly show people they're all gonna make market salary, you won't raise money. I mean, especially in earlier stage, cash is king. You wanna make sure it can last as long as possible, so people fully expect, you know, you're taking 50% cut, whatever it may be on your salary. The rest may be accrued and get paid later, or you're getting paid in stock. But no, I would put in what you believe realistically. Now, what you want to do is, as time goes by, you know, eventually those people are going to demand, you know, better salary, and you know, your benefits is probably going to start at 0, but eventually it's going to eventually go up to 10, 12, 15, maybe even 20% of the compensation at some point. So I would build it up. But no, in the beginning, put in what realistically it would be and document it. Again, you hear me talk about it. As long as you document, those are the assumptions, those are the expectations, and people are fine with it. What you don't want to get into is you have an agreement with people, and then you raise venture money, and then everybody is like, oh, well, now we have money, we want to go spend. So then you kind of get quickly out of sync with your budget. So. Any other items kind of, on the G&A expense stuff that's not clear? Okay. One thing I briefly mentioned is directors and officers insurance. I see that on a lot of plans. It is expensive, and good lawyers will tell you to avoid it. It is not worth the $10,000, $20,000 premium you would pay. Some VCs are going to require it, but substantially the ones who've been around realize that, the risk is low, and after the end run, pretty much, a lot of things have been carved out of those insurance policies. So unless you're doing something really, really risky and you have a lot of minority shareholders, spend the proper amount for insurance, but not too much. A lot of startups spend way too much in the insurance category, in my view. So this is an eye chart. So, but I pulled from one of the board packages, kind of just give you an example of what realistically it actually looks like. I don't remember what year it was, 07, 08, but this was for Radar Fund, where we had, in this time frame, so 20 employees. You could see for this business, investors wanted to know what was the initial value of the contract and what was some of the supporting value for the contract. How many customers we installed, how many customers we sold, and then cash out items, cash in items. Okay, so in this period we collected 1.9, almost $2 million cash in, another $2.5 million came from equity, and we spent $4.5 million. So just a brief kind of summary. This is done on yearly. When I want to do usually board meetings, I show this on a monthly, maybe quarterly basis, so you can actually start making decisions on it. But at the end of the day, you end up with a cash in, cash out, and some of the key metrics that's important to your business, all on one page, and you can pretty much answer 9 out of 10 questions investors are going to ask you about your financials. And if they want to drill down into why is engineering going down or why is G&A going up, then that's where we can start drilling down. But the basics of where their money is going to, how you're spending the money, you can answer it with a cash budget here. So I'm a big fan of graphics, as long as they are clean and easy to read. This was for a business plan I had put together where you see, okay, we raised some money, we would use it to complete the product, get the beta. After the beta, finally we achieved the key milestone, we would raise the next round and take it to the channel. So one of these guys I actually have to map realistically how it looked. It wasn't as smooth as this, but that was what the version of the business plan. So we're running a little bit. I'm going to try to wrap up here, then see what questions you guys have. So some lessons I've learned. Focus on cash budget. We talked about this, unless you really need the full-blown statements. Forecasting for earlier stage is difficult. That's just the nature of it, especially as time goes by. I usually focus really hard on the next 12 months. Maybe you go a little bit further, 18 months or so, but after that, it's really anybody's guess. So, and the further out you go, the accuracy deteriorates. So keep it thorough but simple. I've seen people put Excel models together. It's 10, 20 meg Excel models, and they use every formula that Excel can offer. Keep it simple. At some point, you're going to share your model with people. They want to go through. They want to change things. So you want to be thorough but simple. As much as possible, base your assumptions on the feedback you've gotten from customers, especially on the sales side. We talked about milestones. What are those key milestones and how much does it take to achieve those key milestones? Murphy's Law, plan. Include the amount of buffer you need, both dollars and time in here. Document. You want to document all the key assumptions. So a lot of the questions you were asking is, as long as things are documented, everybody knows where these numbers came from. Again, keep asking yourself, do these things make sense? Does $50 million in revenue in year 2 make sense? Keep asking yourself about, once it's all done, show it to people and they'll give you feedback, especially like I showed you that one paycheck. You know, you can go share that with people who've done this before. They'll tell you, you know what, these things, some of these numbers, the ratios just do not make sense. So, and lastly, you know, it's easier than you think. So, so I'll kind of pause in here. Yeah, I think that's the last slide. But I don't know how much time we have, Howie, but it's about 10 more minutes maybe. So,
Yeah.
you know, if you got questions on financials, fundraising, whatever else I've covered, I'm more than happy to get into it.
So 10 more minutes for Q&A. People should feel free to leave, but we'll do a group Q&A here. And also take out your feedback form, which is on the last sheet of your packet here, and rip it off and fill that out while doing the Q&A. But jump right in. If you've got questions, now's the time.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. For example, if you start a company, then you have to realize how much money you have to allocate for your work. How do you could start doing that? Because maybe, you guys start like not having a big salary or nothing at all, and then you sustain by your own. Or you can include your salaries at the beginning and then make the business. What do you recommend to start? How to start with that?
So, if you're specifically asking about salaries, you know, that actually ends up becoming a negotiation with the first investors who put in the money. But you want to be, I'm a big fan of, you want to pay people something. You don't want to do, you know, all equity. It's just too risky. When things go wrong, which they do, then you have more issues to deal with. So you want to pay people something. You just can't afford to pay them earlier stage market salaries. So 15, 20, 30% of market salary is kind of the norm, you know, I see. The rest of it really depends on how much equity that person has in the company. But those are the things, you know, you start with those numbers, and a lot of it, unfortunately, is going to be, you know, what the investors agree to. So what you don't want to do is waste a lot of money on salaries. Trust me, because a lot of times, if you end up paying yourself a lot of money up front, you're just in a way diluting yourself, because you're going to run out of cash sooner, and then you got to go raise money, and then, you know, kind of the cycle repeats in here. So, you know, I always say pay yourself something, but and increase that amount as time goes by. Once you get to the revenue stage, I can see where you would pay yourself market salaries. Now, the benefits may not be there, but at least, okay, maybe your salaries got up to, because there's now money coming in from the customers to cover the expenses. So, you know, build it up from small and grow it from there. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir.
What happens if you have like a capital intensive, say a real estate project? Does it still apply to the burn rate? You know, you have a budget for construction, for implementation. So, I don't know, how does that apply?
So I'll make two comments. If you're doing a business that's on the balance sheet side, you're doing leasing the stuff, that's one of the exceptions that I'll tell you, you probably want to develop a full-blown financial. Because now you're dealing with assets and liabilities and receivables and payables and the timing of, you know, when the rent comes in and when you have to pay the lease. So at that point, you want to really pay attention to a full-blown model. So do I still do the cash side of it? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I would probably say that's even more important, because if you're doing anything with leasing and financial, the main thing is really your timing. When does the money come in and when does it go out? If I was a landlord, you know, when does the money come in from the person who's paying me, and then when do I have to write the check for the mortgage? So that's still important from a cash in, cash out. So yeah, I would still use that. It's just that if you want to go raise money for that business, you're not talking VCs now. You're talking go to people who, maybe banks or people who do those types of things. Yeah, you got to develop a pretty good financial model for them. So there was a question. Yes, ma'am.
So if you're starting up a consulting type of practice, so you don't have, so your clients are variable, so your costs and the number of hours you put in change every time, how do you adjust your forecast to account for that variability of not having a set product? It depends why it's variable. If it's variable by seasons, if it's a seasonality business, well then I expect to see, okay, during the summer times, let's say it would go down. Otherwise, you can probably do it, you know, I would probably do some type of an averaging.
But if you're doing service business, I'll go back to, it's almost to me, like a renting, leasing business. You are very much dependent on timing of your cash flow. Okay, because you're probably not talking raising, somebody's not going to give you venture money for pure services consulting. So again, this is one of those, I would almost tell you, as I told the gentleman with the software business, I would go start it up and see, what your expectation is. If you're trying to do a law business, an accounting business, and then kind of, give your best estimate on it. So, yes, sir.
In terms of what you were saying on salaries earlier, said that once revenue comes in, start thinking about paying yourself full salary. Would it be more important to wait until you're cash flow positive rather than purely?
Yes.
Bobby, could you repeat that?
Yeah. So the question of when do you pay yourself, kind of market salary. Again, this all depends on who you have around the table from a financing perspective, the stage of the company. But yes, ideally, if the money comes in and can cover your expenses, so you're break even, you're not dependent on outside money anymore, then you can start. You're correct. You can start getting it to market rate at that point. But see, even at that point, I still would argue, is it really worth it going to the market rate? Or is that salary better used to hire another developer or engineer that can actually help the company grow more and more? So, and this is where you see a lot of startups quickly end up paying themselves a lot of money, and then they run out. Then they got to go raise money, and then they haven't achieved the milestone, so now you have a down round, and it all gets messy and messy. It happens over and over and over again. So, which is why, when you want to bring people in, I'm a big fan of, especially if you're going to hire people from big corporations. I stay away from hiring people from big corporations because they say they can do it, but they really can't. Once people's lifestyle get used to a certain dollar amount, history shows you can cut back 15, 20%. You go below that, they just can't do it. They're used to the car and the house and the club fees. That's just the nature of it. So you really, want to make sure, when people tell you they can do that, they've actually done it before and they're in a position that they can afford taking a lower salary. But in the beginning, you don't have a choice. In the beginning, you're talking a few guys in a garage or incubator that, you're doing anything you can to just survive. And then eventually, you get to a point where there's revenue. Now, some businesses, you don't get to that point and you gotta pay money. Pharmaceutical, drug discovery, medical device, it's just, you don't get to that point. So that's where, again, you get into a negotiation with investors, and the key things are, what are those milestones? And you agree, okay, once we get to these milestones, then they'll feel more and more comfortable. They pay you what you're worth, because they also don't want to take, management risk. They don't want you to walk out the door. That's the most valuable asset they have in the business. So, yes, sir.
I know you talked about using a sort of a bottoms-up approach to finding out for your projections.
Yes.
But what do you think about sort of comparing yourself to, existing competition or players in the marketplace that you might be improving on or replacing? Is it good to base your assumptions conservatively off that, or do you still recommend going straight to the consumer?
So I say, you should always compare yourself to the competition, especially from a product feature set. But I would say it's going to be very difficult to do your forecasting based on that. Let's say, you got to make an argument. The competition has 20% of the market. My technology is going to improve that product by a factor of 2. Therefore, I'm going to get that same 20% over whatever period you got to make up. You're now into assumption after assumption after assumption. You can't back it up. Investors are going to question you. You will not be able to back up those assumptions. It's anybody's guess. The other way around is, I went and talked to a few people of these who have this competitive product, and they said, if we have this thing that's twice better, they would switch and use my product. I would do it from bottoms up for early stage. It is. There are certain businesses, let's say you wanted to do something compete. You were doing a semiconductor chip, and there was already another one in the market, absolutely proven, and you went and looked at the track record, and you said, okay, the first time it got this much. Maybe you can base it somewhat on that, but I caution you, especially these days, especially in RTP, if you want to raise any money in a conservative RTP area here, they want to see proof. You got to go talk to customers who are willing to tell them either they're writing you a check or they're getting close to it.
We got time for one more question?
Yes, sir.
What are the key assumptions for investors? I mean, that they consider more?
So it's that list that I had up there that to me from a risk perspective, you know, I mean, when I look at it even from a funding perspective, that's the list I go by all the way in the beginning that I list for you. Is that what you're asking me just from a...
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that when you join with investors, they will be really focused on 2-3 things that they're really worried about. And
So they look at the end of the day, you're talking, you know, there's a technology risk, right? You have something. You have some technology, some service. You got this technology risk. You got the management risk and you got the market risk. I mean, to me, it pretty much falls into one of those three. The technology one is the one that they either believe in it or they don't. It's either patented or it's not. It's either working or it's not, or they know where the boundaries are. What I found out is with the technology, people eventually can get comfortable around enough to know what the risks are. There may be a lot of it, but they need to know. It's the marketing side and the management side, the execution side, that's, you know, the big unknowns, right? Can they actually find people that can execute this play? Is there really a market for this now? Go look at nanotechnology. Millions and millions went into it. Well, what happened? Very, very few things came out of it. Not that the technology didn't work. A lot of technologies work, but it couldn't really get to a point where the market needed it. It was still chemistry. It wasn't electronics. We're now kind of getting shifted to that. So some of that marketing risk is where VCs take a lot of risks. And this is why I'm a big fan of the more customers you can talk to that will tell you, you know what, if you go build this widget, they'll consider buying it from you, and you can have that list to give to investors, the better. If you have revenue, which is why software is great, even better. Once you start having revenue, that solves 9 out of 10 questions, you know, earlier stage investors are worried about. Because at the end of the day, all that list I have, the reason people keep drilling into this, they want to know if you're going to sell or not. Most VCs don't care what you sell. I mean, they may tell you, but they really don't care whether it's Orange or medical devices. At the end of the day, it's all about return on investment. That's what the LPs get measured on. The LPs are pushing them to. So, and which is why it's all about, can it get to revenue and how quickly can it grow? So,
thanks so much for a very